The history of information control is often studied through the lens of state mandates or direct political suppression. But the 21st century introduced a far subtler mechanism of control: economic friction applied by opaque systems. Power in this new digital environment is not held by editors or censors, but by algorithms designed for maximum profit. This story tracks the evolution of that system, tracing how a crisis in corporate advertising inadvertently redefined the boundaries of independent journalism. Today, the pursuit of complex, critical reporting, the kind that holds institutions to account, is often penalized not by government decree, but by financial starvation. The system that enabled this shift was built on a simple premise: content freely uploaded is monetized by aligning corporate advertisements with viewer traffic. This arrangement created an open, lucrative ecosystem. For years, the platform expanded rapidly, offering independent creators an escape valve from traditional media constraints. But the incentives holding this order together contained the seeds of its eventual collapse. Stability was maintained only as long as corporate brands trusted the chaotic, volatile environment of user-generated content. That trust was severely misjudged.
The existing order shattered in March 2017, a date now known simply as the Adpocalypse. A series of high-profile incidents revealed that advertisements from major global brands were appearing adjacent to extremist, offensive, or inappropriate content. This was a systemic failure of categorization and moderation. The consequence was immediate and catastrophic: a massive, coordinated exodus of advertisers. The platform, facing a sudden existential threat to its revenue model, was forced into a desperate retreat. In response, the platform introduced drastically tightened, advertiser-friendly content guidelines. These rules required near-instantaneous implementation across billions of videos, a task far beyond human capacity. The solution was the deployment of expanded automated moderation, an opaque machine learning model tasked with ensuring brand safety. This algorithm was designed not to judge truth or editorial context, but to minimize risk. It focused on signals it could easily quantify: keywords, titles, and thumbnails related to violence, tragedy, or sensitive political issues. It treated all risky topics as equally dangerous to corporate revenue, regardless of the journalistic merit behind them. This decision, born purely of financial survival, introduced structural pressure onto independent reporting.
The central actor in this new dynamic was not an individual, but the mechanism itself: algorithmic demonetization. When the automated system flagged a video, it removed the direct revenue stream, the yellow dollar icon. More critically, this action triggered a severe limitation on the video's distribution. The platform's powerful recommendation engine, which dictates where most viewers find content, avoided videos flagged as not advertiser-friendly. This was not a direct ban, but rather what researchers would later term censorship by proxy. It was suppression executed through financial disincentive. For independent journalists and analytical creators, this presented an impossible constraint. To provide the depth and context necessary for complex analysis, whether covering political corruption, state violence, or systemic failure, they inevitably touched on topics the algorithm flagged as high risk. To survive economically, they had to adapt to the machine's limitations. This led to the rise of algo-speak, a deliberate, surreal new dialect where creators self-censored, using coded language and euphemisms to evade detection. The consequence was a degradation of serious discourse, forced into a permanent whisper to satisfy the needs of brand safety.
This structural conflict came into sharp focus when independent journalists attempted to cover matters of high public accountability and institutional failure. The Epstein case provided a stark example.
When the U.S. Congress passed the Epstein Files Transparency Act with rare bipartisan support, the mandate was clear: release the documents and restore public trust. This represented a consensus across the political spectrum that institutional failure required radical transparency. However, the efforts of independent creators to analyze the subsequent document releases and surrounding controversies immediately ran afoul of the algorithmic constraints. While mainstream news outlets could leverage their institutional size to navigate the monetization system, smaller, specialized channels were penalized for the same coverage. For the platform, the content was high risk. For the public, it was critical context. The crucial confrontation arrived not in the release itself, but in the institutional response: the heavy, often sloppy redactions by the FBI on the released files. The ensuing public outrage was driven less by partisan politics and more by a shared frustration over institutional negligence, particularly the failure to adequately protect victims while obscuring powerful individuals.
The system's arbitrariness only confirmed the analytical findings. Research published in 2022 identified that the algorithm prioritized safe metrics like channel size and video duration over the actual journalistic content of the content. Success or failure in monetization was increasingly dependent on the uploader's algorithmic status, not the depth of their investigation. For independent journalism, the constraint was clear: you must be big enough to survive the penalty, or you must simplify the truth to avoid the penalty. The financial viability of long-form, complex analysis withered under this pressure. This dynamic highlights the difference between intent and outcome. The platform did not set out to censor specific investigations. Rather, its necessary pursuit of brand safety, an economic objective, created an arbitrary, blunt system whose functional effect was highly effective censorship by proxy. The broken algorithm, focused on minimizing corporate risk, achieved the outcome of suppressing accountability reporting. This systemic challenge occurs against a backdrop of increasing fragility in global press freedom, where the economic pressures of platforms unintentionally align with the suppressive goals of restrictive regimes.
The phase defined by the Adpocalypse and the subsequent rise of the risk-averse algorithm has established a new equilibrium. The rules of engagement are set. Truth is permissible only if it does not threaten the profitability of advertising partners. The economic structure dictates the boundaries of political discourse. Independent journalism, focused on accountability, is now perpetually negotiating with code, using euphemisms, sanitizing language, or risking financial ruin for the sake of clarity. While the Streisand effect occasionally gives suppressed content a brief, powerful burst of visibility, the long-term predictable suppression enabled by demonetization remains the dominant structural force. The most critical question remains unanswered. Can long-form independent journalism remain financially viable on platforms whose intrinsic design aggressively filters out the very complexity required to analyze institutional power? The constraints faced today are not political statutes, but economic algorithms, invisible, pervasive, and driven by market logic. This story is not resolved. It is merely a transition from one form of control to another. The battle for information has simply moved to a higher layer of abstraction, fought in the digital architecture of finance, where accountability is calculated as risk and complexity is always deemed unsafe.